We often look at leadership and, strategy, organizational health, and we tend to think it's all very modern.
Right. Driven by data, algorithms, quarterly results, all that stuff.
Exactly. We assume the challenges leaders face today, like market swings or building innovative cultures, need tools invented like yesterday.
But, the sources we're diving into today suggest something else entirely. They argue that the really deep, the really tough challenges of making organizations work well, they're actually timeless.
That's a fascinating angle. What kind of sources are we talking about here?
It's quite a mix, almost like an intellectual timeline, you could say.
Right.
We're starting way back with ancient ethical texts, the Bhagavad Gita, Cicero's insights on politics.
Okay, the classics.
Yeah, and then moving through military strategy, think Sun Tzu, Clausewitz, and landing right in, the thick of modern corporate life. Pixar's Brain Trust, Google and their OKRs, Andy Grove wrestling with change at Intel.
Wow, that's a broad sweep. So our mission for this deep dive is what exactly? To connect these dots.
Precisely. We want to synthesize these texts that seem so different on the surface. We're trying to look past the specific setting, whether it's an ancient battlefield or a cutting-edge animation studio.
And find the core principles, right? The
Yeah.
ones leaders need to really build resilient organizations, especially when everything feels like it's constantly changing or, frankly, in conflict.
And that brings us to the central question, the one that really anchors this whole discussion. How does mastering your own internal state, that sort of pursuit of inner clarity, detachment,
Your inner game, basically.
exactly, how does that connect directly to achieving external success, whether that success is in business or politics or even warfare? What we're going to find, I think, is that the best strategies often start inside the leader, not out there in the market.
Okay, let's unpack this idea of the internal foundation. And starting with the Bhagavad Gita seems, well, fundamental. It brings in this non-material idea of consciousness that just changes the whole game for why we do things.
It really does. And it's crucial because it pushes back against the sort of default materialism that shapes how many modern organizations think and operate.
What's the core argument there?
The core argument is that consciousness is transcendental. It isn't just produced by the brain or some combination of material elements. It doesn't originate from matter.
So where does it come from? Or how does it interact with the material world?
The Gita suggests that material circumstances act more like a filter or maybe a distorting lens. They pervertedly reflect consciousness. Think of pure white light passing through colored glass.
Ah, okay. The glass, our situation, our ego, whatever, it taints the pure light, consciousness itself.
Exactly. It colors it, distorts it. So the goal isn't necessarily just to change the external situation, like getting a new job or restructuring a department.
The real work is internal, purifying that contaminated consciousness.
That's it. And the Gita calls these purified activities bhakti.
Bhakti. What does that look like in practice, especially for someone in a leadership role?
Well, bhakti involves activities that are, let's say, transcendental to the modes of material nature. Essentially, they're actions done without attachment to the results.
So on the outside, it might look like normal work, like an accountant doing the books or a general planning strategy.
It could look exactly the same, but the internal motivation is different. It's pure because it's linked to a higher principle or a sense of duty, rather than just, selfish gain or ego gratification.
And that kind of action, because it's purified, it doesn't create those karmic entanglements. It leads to inner peace.
That's the idea. It's non-binding. It fosters internal happiness regardless of the external outcome.
This must build incredible resilience. The text talks about the muni, the person whose mind is fixed, who's sort of moved beyond endless mental speculation.
Yes, the muni is someone who has, through introspection and understanding, come to the conclusion that the ultimate reality, Vasudeva or Kanthina, is the essence of everything.
Okay, so if a CEO or a leader could reach that state, how would they react to a major crisis, a product failure, a stock market crash?
Their defining characteristic would be steadfastness, unwavering steadiness. When faced with what the text calls the onslaughts of threefold miseries, those inevitable, sometimes crushing setbacks life throws at us.
The ones that make most leaders panic.
Right. The muni isn't disturbed. And here's the really counterintuitive part. They accept the misery, the suffering, as a minimized mercy.
Minimized mercy. What does that mean?
It means they internalize the idea that based on past actions or errors, they probably deserve far worse. So this current difficulty is actually the minimum consequence, a kind of grace.
Wow. That completely short-circuits the ego's usual reaction, doesn't it? The blame, the anger, the why me.
Completely. It removes the ego from the center of the suffering.
Yeah.
It inoculates you against the anxiety and paralysis that often grip leaders in a crisis.
And does it work the other way, too? With success?
Absolutely. When things go well, landing a huge contract, achieving amazing growth, the Muni doesn't take personal credit. They attribute the success to the Supreme or to the underlying principles, thinking themselves unworthy of the good fortune.
So the success isn't about them, it's just happening.
They see it more as a grace, an opportunity that allows them to render better service or perform their duty more effectively. It reframes every outcome. Win or lose, the internal state remains steady, focused on the process, on the duty, not the temporary result.
So they're always active, always daring, as the text says, but they're not driven by attachment or aversion. Let's nail those two down, Rugged Theo.
Right, Rugga and VL. Rugga is attachment, basically, wanting things, accepting things, purely for your own sense gratification or ego boost. Getting attached to praise, profit, power.
And Theo.
That's aversion. Rejecting things, pushing them away because they're unpleasant, inconvenient, or uncomfortable. Avoiding difficult tasks, fearing failure, hating criticism.
And the Gita says these two are major stumbling blocks.
Huge stumbling blocks. Text 34 specifically warns against coming under their control. If attachment or aversion dictates your actions, your purpose, your determination is compromised.
So for a leader, this means not getting addicted to the highs of success.
Which leads to arrogance, reckless risks.
And not being paralyzed by the fear of failure or difficulty.
Which leads to denial, clinging to the past, fighting the inevitable. True leadership, in this view, is attached only to the process of doing what's right, fulfilling one's duty, not to the feeling generated by success or failure.
It's fascinating how this ancient idea of shedding ego, of getting beyond personal will, echoes in, of all people, Ralph Waldo Emerson.
It really does.
Yeah.
And Emerson comes at it from a seemingly secular angle, looking at historical figures like Caesar or Napoleon.
Figures we usually associate with immense personal willpower, right? The great man theory, bending the world to their vision through sheer force of will.
That's the standard narrative. But Emerson flips it. He argues their greatest power wasn't actually in them personally. It was more like they tapped into something larger.
Something in nature, he says.
Yes. Their success came from their parallelism to the course of thought. It's like they became an unobstructed channel for what needed to happen.
An unobstructed channel, so what looked like incredible willpower from the outside.
Was actually, Emerson suggests, willingness and even self-annihilation.
And
Getting their own ego, their own agenda completely out of the way.
he uses that metaphor of a pipe, right? The virtue is being smooth and hollow.
Exactly. The pipe doesn't generate the force, it just conducts it. When the galvanism flows, the public mistakenly credits the conductor, the leader, instead of the underlying current or necessity.
That's a radical challenge to the modern cult of the relentlessly ambitious, ego-driven leader. It suggests true power lies in becoming a conduit, not a source.
A profound counter-argument. It implies that peak performance, maybe even genius, isn't about straining and forcing, but about aligning and allowing.
But if that's true, why is the strenuous exertion of will model so common? Is it just, well, easier than achieving that inner willingness?
Oh, I think it's much easier. Exerting will is visible. It looks like doing something. Society often rewards it. Willingness, self-annihilation, that requires the deep internal work the Gita talks about, purifying consciousness. It's invisible work.
The leader exerting will might be afraid of looking passive.
Precisely. Whereas the conduit leader has the faith, the humility, to trust that if they align themselves correctly with reality, with duty, the necessary action will flow through them. That takes guts, a different kind of courage.
And this inner core, this principle-centered foundation, becomes absolutely critical when things go catastrophically wrong. Viktor Frankl's experience in the concentration camps is maybe the starkest example.
Frankl's man's search for meaning is incredibly powerful here. He saw that even in the most horrific circumstances, humans retain a final freedom, the freedom to choose their attitude.
He identified those sources of meaning: work, love, courage.
Yes, doing something significant, work, caring for others, love, and finding courage in the face of suffering. But the crucial point was that suffering itself is meaningless.
It's neutral. It just is.
Exactly. We are the ones who give it meaning by how we respond. Even in the camps, he saw people could choose. They could remain brave, dignified, unselfish.
Or they could regress, lose their humanity, become like animals fighting for survival.
That choice, Frankl argued, determined whether life retained meaning even in the depths of despair. For a leader facing Perhaps not a concentration camp, but maybe corporate ruin or total failure. That choice about how to face it is the ultimate test.
It's about retaining that moral integrity, choosing your response even when external solutions are gone. It's the practical application of the Gita's inner purity, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It's the non-material capital, the inner strength, that sustains you when everything tangible has collapsed.
Yeah.
So moving from that vital inner core, the leader's resilience and dignity, we shift focus outward. How does this internal state translate into the practical exercise of authority, into governing or leading others effectively and morally? Cicero is fascinating here.
Right. Looking back at the Roman Republic's decline, what was his big takeaway?
His conclusion was pretty stark. Rome fell into chaos, into calamities, largely because its leaders and perhaps the culture itself came to prefer being feared rather than being loved and esteemed.
The age-old dilemma. Rule by fear or inspire loyalty through goodwill. Seems like every leader faces that choice.
It's fundamental.
Yeah.
And Cicero comes down hard on one side. He says, look, the power of goodwill is immense. It's enduring. The power of fear, it's feeble. It might work for a while.
Short-term compliance, maybe.
Exactly. But it's inherently unstable. It breeds resentment, plots, eventual collapse. He argues that while the amount of love or esteem you might need varies, leading a nation versus a small team, having that core group of friends or colleagues who genuinely hold you in high esteem, who trust your character,
Yeah.
that's essential.
Essential for the leader's own stability and for the health of the state or organization.
Yes. And that esteem, crucially, is tied directly to justice. This is where Cicero gets really emphatic. He warns leaders against falling into the trap of separating what's right from what seems, convenient or expedient at the moment.
That classic calculation. Well, this isn't strictly right, but it's expedient for us right now.
Cicero says that exact thought process is the slippery slope, the root cause of all frauds, betrayals, and ultimately crimes in governance. His ethical standard is absolute. Nothing unjust can ever be truly expedient or beneficial in the long run. If it's fundamentally unfair, it will eventually backfire. It will poison the well.
He uses that thought experiment, the Ring of Gyges story, but applies it to wills, right? To test this idea of absolute justice.
Yeah, what's a great test? Gyges found a ring that made him invisible and used it to seize power. Cicero adapts it. Imagine a truly good person who could, just by snapping their fingers, secretly insert their name into the wills of wealthy people.
And they know with 100% certainty they'll never get caught. Absolute impunity.
Would they do it? Cicero's answer is a firm no. The genuinely good person wouldn't use that power, even with guaranteed impunity, because the act itself is unjust.
So, translating that to today, would a CEO secretly dump toxic waste if they knew for sure no regulator or journalist could ever trace it? Would they use insider info?
That's the modern equivalent. It boils down to that old peasant definition of honesty he mentions. You could trust someone to play odd and even with you in the dark.
Nah, I like that. Integrity is what happens when no one's watching.
Exactly. And for a leader, gaining that kind of trust, that belief in their fundamental justice, is the moral capital needed to endure crises and maintain loyalty. Fear evaporates the moment you turn your back. Trust based on justice endures.
Okay, so Cicero champions goodwill and justice. But then we get thinkers like Machiavelli and Hobbes who seem much more, well, cynical or pragmatic about maintaining power, especially in turbulent times.
They definitely bring a harder edge, focusing on the mechanics of control and stability. Machiavelli, for instance, looks at that tricky moment when a ruler, or maybe a new CEO after a merger, tries to shift from a more participatory system to absolute control.
What's the danger zone, he points out?
Relying too heavily on the existing magistrates, the middle managers, the established local powers. In times of trouble, these figures can easily undermine the new leader, either through subtle resistance or outright defiance.
Why? Because the people, the employees, are used to obeying them.
Precisely. Their loyalty is to the established structure, not automatically to the new person at the top. So Machiavelli advises the wise prince, the savvy leader.
Not just to crush opposition, but to be smarter.
Yes, to strategically set things up so that the citizens, or the employees, come to always need the state and the leader. Their loyalty becomes based on ongoing necessity, not just past habit or abstract goodwill.
That sounds pretty calculating.
It is. He points to Philip of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, who held his kingdom together against powerful enemies like Rome. How? By being skilled in war, yes, but also by knowing how to attract the people while simultaneously securing the nobles.
So keep the masses happy enough, but make sure the powerful elites are locked in.
It's a pragmatic balancing act. You need popular support, but the real internal threat often comes from the powerful few, who need to be managed carefully, feeling both valued and controlled.
And Hobbes provides the sort of philosophical justification for why this strong central authority is so vital.
Hobbes basically argues that without a strong, unified sovereign power, society inevitably collapses back into the state of war, chaos, conflict, every man for himself.
So the sovereign needs to hold on to certain key rights.
Absolutely. The rights to make war and peace, judge what's necessary for defense, levy taxes, make laws, punish. These essential rights must remain intact and held by the sovereign. If you start dividing them up or letting others usurp them, the whole system falls apart.
And this leads to that tricky point about justice and the sovereign's actions.
Right. Hobbes argues that because the subjects, by creating the Commonwealth, have essentially authorized all the sovereign's actions in advance, they cannot logically accuse the sovereign of injustice.
Even if the sovereign does something terrible.
The sovereign might commit iniquity, act wickedly, violate moral or natural law, but not injustice in the sense of breaking the social contract with the subjects who authorized him. It's a fine but crucial distinction.
So the subjects might think the leader is wrong, morally bad, but they can't claim the leader acted unjustly against them within the agreed-upon system.
That's the Hobbesian argument. Translated to an organization, it means the ultimate authority, the board, the CEO, has to retain the non-negotiable right to set direction and make tough calls. Otherwise, you just get paralysis and internal conflict.
If every department head feels they have veto power over the corporate strategy.
The sovereignty of the organization dissolves. There's no coherent direction.
Okay, but let's pivot back from that absolute view. Xenophon, writing about Cyrus the Great, offers a more relational approach, especially for managing those high performers Machiavelli worried about.
Xenophon's Cyropedia is fascinating. Cyrus knew the biggest threat wasn't the common soldier, but the skilled, ambitious commanders around him, the ones who carried the best weapons and felt confident they could rule themselves.
So how did he manage that risk? Did he just keep them under tight control?
Partly through cultivating an aura of dignity. He trained his whole his executives, you might say, never to spit, never to stare distractedly, to maintain a kind of aloof, impressive bearing so that subjects wouldn't look down on them. Appearance mattered.
It's a sophisticated use of presentation to reinforce authority. But what about the actual power threat from those commanders?
His core strategy wasn't disarming them or constantly watching them. It was, quite honorably, winning their friendship. He worked deliberately to make them more devoted to him personally than they were to each other.
Building individual loyalty that superseded peer loyalty?
Exactly. He cultivated relationships, showed respect, involved them. It's a powerful insight. You can't really control your best people, your most talented leaders. You have to win them over. You bind them to the mission through genuine connection and purpose.
And Xenophon contrasts this sharply with how the slaves or the general population were treated, right?
Yes, it's a stark contrast. Those destined for servitude were deliberately kept unarmed, not encouraged towards ambition or noble toil, and their lives were structured to ensure they remain compliant forever. Cyrus understood you manage your potential successors completely differently from your rank and file. With the top talent, the goal is devotion. With the rest, it might just be compliance. Okay, so if the ancients were focused on securing loyalty through justice, friendship, or sometimes necessity, how do modern high-performing organizations, especially creative ones, secure their success? Increasingly, it seems to hinge on candor.
Radical candor, right.
Yeah.
The ability to speak truth even when it's uncomfortable. And the Pixar brain trust seems like the gold standard here. What was that environment actually like?
Ed Catmull describes it as a place of really frank talk, yes, but also spirited debate, lots of laughter, and underlying it all, genuine affection and respect. Outsiders apparently often got the wrong impression.
They heard the volume, the people talking over each other, and thought it was just arguing, like a bad meeting.
Exactly. But the intent was totally different. In the brain trust, the argument, the debate, wasn't about winning or defending territory. It was purely about excavating the truth, finding what was wrong with the story and how to make it better.
And this commitment to truth, to candor, was so fundamental that it led to something pretty astonishing. Sidelining Steve Jobs.
That anecdote is just incredible, isn't it? Catmull and the others realized that even if Jobs just sat silently in the brain trust meetings, his mere presence, the ultimate boss, The guy with the vision and the funding would stifle honest feedback.
People would self-censor, wouldn't tell him his pet idea was terrible.
No director would risk it. And then the amazing part is, Jobs agreed. She accepted the ban, based on the shared belief that the story team knew more about narrative structure than he did.
That takes a remarkable level of self-awareness, or maybe that Emersonian self-annihilation we talked about, putting the project's success above his own need to be involved or exert control.
Absolutely. An ego detached enough to serve the collective goal.
So how did they actually deliver this candid feedback effectively? Through the good note?
Right, the concept of the good note.
Yeah.
It couldn't just be tearing something down, saying this scene is boring or I hate this character. That's useless feedback.
So what makes a note good?
Specificity is key. But more than that, it has to be constructive. It should ideally inspire the person receiving it. You're criticizing, yes, but you're also helping to build the solution. Andrew Stanton's example is great. Instead of saying the dialogue is weak, saying something like, don't you want people walking out of the theater quoting these lines?
Ah, that reframes it as a shared aspiration, a challenge, not just a complaint.
Exactly. It builds up as it points out a flaw.
But making this whole system work, having people willing to give and receive these tough notes, surely requires that leader detachment we discussed earlier. The Gita's Muni state, Emerson's conduit.
It's absolutely essential, especially when dealing with strong personalities like Jobs himself. The key, Catmull said, was always shifting the focus off the person who had the idea and onto the idea itself.
Depersonalizing the feedback.
Yes. And Jobs, for all his passion, was apparently very good at this. He'd throw ideas out, advocate for them strongly, but if the brain trust shot them down with good reasons, he'd just let go. No lingering ego attachment. He was testing ideas against the collective brain, not defending his personal creations.
That culture sounds amazing when things are going well, but how does it hold up under real pressure? Like when Pixar faced those project meltdowns, did the candor turn into blame?
That was the critical test. And no, according to Catmull, they didn't point fingers outward at the directors or the teams. The leadership immediately looked inward.
They asked themselves, what are we doing wrong?
Yes. Why are we making it hard for these incredibly talented people to succeed? They own the problem. The general manager, Jim Morris, said something powerful that nothing's more crucial than developing new projects and directors and their willingness to roll up our pant legs and wade into the muck. Together showed the culture wasn't just talk, it was resilient.
That sounds like the organizational version of Frankel's choice, facing suffering with dignity and collective responsibility, not devolving into blame.
Precisely.
And receiving that kind of direct, sometimes painful feedback, especially if you're the creator whose baby is being critiqued, that takes real emotional strength. Brené Brown talks a lot about psychological safety here.
It's paramount. You need that safety to be vulnerable enough to hear the truth. And she emphasizes the skill of blending, listening, integrating the feedback and reflecting it back. But also, importantly, setting boundaries when needed.
How so?
Well, if you're getting bombarded with notes, feeling overwhelmed, the courageous and actually productive thing isn't to shut down, but to say something like, okay, wow, that's a lot. I'm feeling overloaded right now.
Yeah.
Can we focus on just this one specific issue you raised? Let's really dig into that for 15 minutes and then maybe schedule another time for the rest.
So you acknowledge the feedback, show willingness, but manage the flow so you can actually process it. That takes self-possession.
It does. It protects the process and the person.
All this focus on culture, candor, psychological safety. It really highlights that distinction Stephen Covey made between leadership and management, doesn't it?
Oh, hugely. Covey's point was that management success being efficient, controlling processes, keeping things running smoothly, it can't make up for leadership failure.
What's the core of leadership failure, in his view?
Failing to set the right direction, failing to build the right culture, failing to define the purpose. Those are the quadrant 2 activities, the important but not always urgent strategic preventative work. Ignoring leadership, Covey famously said, is like straightening deck chairs on the Titanic.
You can manage the details perfectly, but if the ship's going down...
your management efficiency is irrelevant. Leadership sets the course.
And in modern organizations, the tools for translating that leadership vision into action often involve frameworks like OKRs and CFRs.
Exactly. OKR's objectives and key results provide the clear structure, the what and how we'll measure it. They create transparency. But they need to be paired with CFRs, conversations, feedback, recognition, which provide the human element, the cultural reinforcement.
This sounds like where the manager's role shifts significantly.
It absolutely does. The manager stops being just a supervisor checking off tasks and becomes more of a coach, a mentor. The focus shifts from just reviewing past performance, did you hit your numbers, to actively developing future capability. How can I help you improve your decision making?
Like coaching a product head on being more decisive by suggesting they always present two options and state their preference.
Exactly. It's about building skills, not just evaluating outcomes.
And how do systems like OKRs avoid just reinforcing the status quo or locking people into silos? How do they actually drive innovation?
Good question. Two key ways.
Hmm.
First, by encouraging a significant chunk of OKRs, maybe around half, to come from the bottom up. Recognizing that innovation often sparks at the edges of the organization where people are closest to the customer or the technology.
Not just top-down directives.
Right. And second, by actively using shared, horizontal OKRs that cut across different departments or teams. This forces collaboration, breaks down those us versus them silos, and allows for quicker, more coordinated action on complex problems. It connects the edges. Now, all these elements, inner steadiness, justice, candor, clear goals, they really get put to the ultimate test when an organization hits what Andy Grove called a strategic inflection point, a CAP.
Right, that moment where the fundamental basis of the business changes, competition shifts, technology changes, regulations change. Something major rocks the boat.
And Grove's big insight from Intel's incredibly painful experience getting out of the memory chip business was that the word point in SEP is misleading. It's almost never a single moment.
It's a struggle, he said. A long, torturous struggle.
Exactly. He detailed how it took Intel 3 years from the market slump in 1984 until they finally returned to profitability in mid-1987 to fully make that transition out of memories and into microprocessors. 3 years. That's an eternity in tech.
And what was the biggest cost during that time? Was it the layoffs, the restructuring?
He argued the biggest cost was actually the time wasted fighting the inevitable, trying to find little niches where the old memory business could survive, denying the fundamental shift that had occurred. That delay just made the eventual actions harsher and more rushed.
So navigating SIP successfully requires a leadership approach that echoes that Muni ideal we talked about earlier. Steady, rational, persistent.
Very much so. Grove emphasized the need for rational, non-threatening, but steadily moving discussions. He contrasted Intel's struggle with how HP managed some of their transformation slower, maybe, but always progressing through consensus. He also pointed to the counterexample of John Sculley at Apple.
What happened there?
Sculley apparently understood, intellectually, that Apple needed to adapt its software strategy to be compatible with Intel chips, a huge strategic shift. But he failed to bring the rest of the organization along with him. He couldn't build that consensus.
So the leader's insight isn't enough. The whole organization needs to reach a kind of shared understanding to navigate the turn.
It has to become a shared consciousness. Otherwise, the internal resistance or inertia will kill the transformation.
And what makes these long, difficult transitions even harder today is the relentless pressure from the market for short-term results, right?
Oh, absolutely. The statistics are pretty stark. One source mentioned the average holding period for stocks in 2020 had plummeted to around 5 months.
5 months, that's incredibly short-term.
It forces this obsessive focus on smooth, predictable quarterly earnings. It cultivates that that aversion to any short-term pain or dip in profits, even if it's necessary for long-term health. Companies become reluctant to make big, necessary investments in R&D, in tackling climate change impacts, in major strategic shifts, because it might hurt the next quarter's numbers.
Stock buybacks are often mentioned in this context, aren't they?
Yes, often cited as a prime example, a way to artificially boost earnings per share in the short term, making executives look good, but potentially diverting capital away from investments that would actually make the business stronger and more valuable over the long haul.
But is there evidence that resisting this pressure, taking the long view, actually pays off?
There is. One analysis suggested that companies adopting a genuinely long-term strategic perspective, basically, acting like that steadfast muni, could potentially generate an additional $1.5 trillion per year in returns on invested capital globally.
Wow. So the short-termism driven by market fear is literally leaving trillions of dollars of value on the table.
It seems so. That fear, that attachment, raga, to immediate positive results and aversion to any temporary difficulty is incredibly costly.
Okay, let's connect this idea of strategic pace and resilience back to some classic military thinking. Sun Tzu had strong views on time in warfare.
Sun Tzu is very clear. Long delays are bad. He says flat out that cleverness has never been seen associated with long delays in war.
So speed is essential.
For him, yes. Protracted campaigns exhaust the troops, drain the treasury, and often lead to disaster. He acknowledges that stupid, rash haste might waste resources, but lengthy operations, even if well-planned, are almost always ruinous. The message for strategy is clear. Efficiency and decisiveness are crucial to conserve strength. Get it done quickly.
That sounds pretty definitive. But then Clausewitz comes along talking about small war, guerrilla warfare, essentially, and seems to offer a different perspective on time.
He does. Clausewitz, analyzing situations where a smaller, weaker force confronts a larger one, notes that the resistance is often more moral than physical. The goal isn't necessarily to win decisive battles.
What is it then?
It's often more about impeding the enemy's advance, wearing them down, eroding their morale, making the occupation costly and difficult. It's a strategy of delay, of patience, of resilience.
So in certain situations, delay can be a weapon. That seems to contradict Sun Tzu.
It does, in a way. It highlights that the right pace depends on the context, on your resources relative to the opponent. If you're the weaker force, strategic delay and moral resistance might be your only path, even if it's costly in Sun Tzu's terms. Think of a startup using clever delaying tactics against a market giant.
Sun Tzu also had that really intense tactic for maximizing effort, the desperado principle. How does that fit in?
Ah, yes. That's about creating absolute commitment by removing options. His advice: throw your soldiers into a situation where there's literally no escape.
Backs against the wall.
Exactly. When retreat is impossible, he argues, soldiers will prefer death to flight. Facing certain death, if they fail, they'll tap into reserves of courage and strength they didn't know they had. There's nothing they may not achieve.
That sounds like the polar opposite of Emerson's willingness and self-annihilation. This is about maximum exertion of will, driven by desperation.
It is. It's a psychological tactic to force complete focus and effort by leveraging the most primal survival instinct.
So we have these two paths to peak performance, it seems. The inner path of detachment and willingness, Emerson, the Gita, and the external path of coercion and desperation, Sun Tzu. Which one is more sustainable for leadership?
While the desperado principle might win you a crucial battle, it can generate incredible short-term force. But it's brutal, it burns people out, and it arguably destroys that human dignity Frankl talked about. It's not a foundation for long-term resilience.
Whereas the Emersonian ideal, the Muni's steadiness.
That detachment from the outcome, that focus on duty and process, that's what allows a leader and an organization to endure the long, torturous struggle of ASAP without collapsing. The action comes from clarity and purpose, not panic.
And we see this need for clarity and adaptability reflected even in modern military contexts, like the shift described in Team of Teams. They found those old, rigid plans just didn't work in complex environments.
Right. The early operations, based on intricate clockwork plans, failed because they lacked real-time flexibility. Even if individual units were highly capable, they operated in silos, they had their own tribal instincts, focused on their piece of the puzzle.
Like different departments in a company, maybe?
Exactly. The solution wasn't better, more complicated plans, it was fostering shared consciousness.
Meaning everyone understands the bigger picture.
Everyone understands the overall goal, the commander's intent. This allows resources like vital surveillance assets during the hunt for a key target like Zarqawi to be dynamically shifted to where they're needed most, based on the shared understanding of the mission, even if it meant overriding a unit's local priorities. It required patience and trust in the collective goal, even when people were dying and the pressure for immediate action was immense. It's about prioritizing the shared truth over tribal comfort. #outro. So when we pull all these threads together, from ancient India and Rome to Pixar and modern warfare, what's the big picture? It seems strikingly consistent.
Yeah, it really does. It feels like whether you're running a city-state, an animation studio, a tech giant, or leading troops, the foundation for lasting success and security isn't just about clever tactics or resources.
No, it seems to come back to cultivating justice within the organization, establishing a really clear sense of purpose, and maybe most importantly, building a culture that genuinely values candor, seeking the truth together over protecting individual egos or chasing short-term wins.
And that core tension we kept bumping up against feels so relevant right now. It's the tension between the timeless advice, stay steady, detached, focused on duty whether you win or lose, like the Muni, and the immediate demands of the modern world.
Like that 5-month stockholding period. The market screams for short-term results, demanding constant gratification, which looks exactly like that rugged Theo that attachment and aversion that Gita warns about.
But the data and the wisdom from thinkers like Grove suggests that succumbing to that pressure, prioritizing the short term, actually destroys long-term value, maybe $1.5 trillion worth.
It's a huge disconnect, and it leads back to that provocative idea from Emerson, doesn't it? That great success might not come from imposing your will, but from becoming that unobstructed channel, achieving excellence through a kind of self-annihilation, getting your ego out of the way.
So the final thought for you, the listener, to maybe reflect on is this. If true, sustainable excellence requires moving beyond sheer willpower, beyond that attachment to immediate results and aversion to difficulty, take a hard look at your own approach.
Yeah, ask yourself, what part of your current strategy, your decisions, your leadership style is driven by that strenuous, ego-driven effort to force an outcome? And what part is genuinely aligned with the deeper currents, with reality, acting with clarity and willingness, like that smooth, hollow pipe ready to channel what truly needs to happen?